Well, I'm speaking about hunger. It's a phrase I've been running into a lot lately, soul hunger, and I've just been sparked a lot of thoughts about hunger in general and what kind of hunger we're talking about. So I just stumbled on a couple of really silly little hunger jokes. You've heard about the seafood diet, haven't you? You seafood, you eat it. Yeah. So I've been on that diet a lot, most of my life. But I also like this Henny Youngman one-liner. You all remember Henny Youngman? Yeah. Well, he talked about his wife a lot. It was part of his shtick. But he said, "Yeah, my wife is a light eater. Yeah, as soon as it's light, she starts to eat." I kind of like that. I'm that kind of eater too. Hungry. We get hungry in lots of ways. I was reading something about how dangerous it is to not feel hunger and thirst. They've got a word for when you don't feel thirsty, a dipsia. I don't know what it is when you don't feel hungry, but it's important to feel hunger so that you can take in the nourishment that you need. But I've been kind of reflecting on hunger at a deeper level. We all know what it is physically. It's that feeling of weakness, kind of emptiness when you need nourishment, when you need to eat. And it also sometimes we use it, I'm hungry for something else, hungry for a little more peace of mind or something. We use it also in the sense of craving or strong desire. I've been running into this phrase lately in reading and on media of different kinds of soul hunger, which is a deeper kind of mental spiritual hunger. And sometimes we're not aware of that level of hunger either. We just know we don't feel quite right, or there's a kind of dissatisfaction or kind of emptiness that we can't quite define or track. Some deep need not being met, something along that line is what's meant by that phrase, I think, soul hunger. And I think there's a lot of it in our lives, in our culture. In some ways, I think it's fed by too much emphasis on what does not satisfy. Because I think as we sort of explore this idea, that's one of the first things to kind of consider is what does not answer the deepest needs of our minds and hearts. What does not fill us up at soul level? And it tends to be material things. And we learn that as we grow up. Wouldn't you agree? I was in a Kroger store just a couple days ago, and I thought, it just reminded me, all children have just this ravenous desire for all kinds of things. And there was a mother rolling her kid around the store, her little one around the store with a little boy, and he was reaching for things all over the store, and he had his hands on something or other, and she wasn't angry, which I appreciated, because it must happen a lot, but in a kind of a sing-songy voice, she was going, "Let him go, let him go, let him go." Like she'd sung that song many times in the past. And I remember that feeling as a child, even to this day, how you just want things so badly. They all look so alluring and you want them. But then as you mature, as you get older, most of us realize they don't usually bring the permanent satisfaction we're looking for. It's always a temporary kind of satisfaction with every new toy or garment or appliance or whatever it might be. It's only kind of a temporary and surface level satisfaction. It's not going to answer the deepest needs of our hearts and minds. It won't get at our soul hunger. It won't nourish us. It'll be just some more icing, just something else on the top. So what does satisfy? I think Henry David Thoreau, one of my favorite writers as a college student and grad student in English, he said the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. I think one of the things he might have meant by that is because of this deep hunger and this restless outer searching for satisfaction and fulfillment in outer ways that don't cut it. And there's a kind of a quiet underlying dissatisfaction. He called it desperation. And I think it's something that's worth reflecting on, each of us. What are you hungry for? Is there a deep level of hunger for something that maybe you're only a little bit aware of? That maybe it would be useful to become a little more aware of so you can nourish yourself more, so we can fill ourselves up more with really true soul nourishment. How do we identify our soul hunger? I think one of the things we do is we identify what our souls are hungry for by looking at what deeply satisfies us and what has deeply satisfied us in our lives. What nourishes you deeply now or in the past? What has nourished you deeply? What activities or ideas or places? What nourishes you deeply? So I thought we could explore some of those channels of deep soul level satisfaction so that maybe we can respond to our soul hunger a little more actively and fill ourselves up better so we're not quite so hungry. So I started with the idea, I had so many, I thought I might be talking about soul hunger next week too, because there's just a lot of richness here. I started thinking of the idea of silence as something our souls are hungry for. And the idea was sparked. This is one of the places I saw the reference to soul hunger in a book I'm reading by a man named Gordon Hempton. He's an acoustic ecologist, the only one I'm aware of. An acoustic ecologist, and he records sounds, natural sounds, in all around the world in beautiful natural places. He's got scads and scads of recordings of really the silence, by which he doesn't mean a total absence of sound, but the silence of nature. So it could be the wind in trees. It could be subtle movement of water. He records that, and he's got a finely tuned ear for the little differences in silence in the Rockies is different from the silence in southern Appalachia. Silence of the desert is different from the silence somewhere else. He's not talking about an absence of sound, but of noise. And that's the other thing he tracks a good deal with his recording, and he's asked to do these recordings in our national parks, for instance. How often is there noise intrusion that interferes with the silence of the natural world? And he reports, kind of unfortunate, but because of, especially now they allow jet travel and so on over all our national parks, Grand Canyon, Mount Olympic, what's the one in Hawaii? We went there. Now I'm sorry to say we took a helicopter ride, but because that's being allowed everywhere, he says he can count up only 12 places around our country where you can still have an absence of noise intrusion for 15 minutes or more. Only 12. One is kind of in his backyard where he lives in Washington, Olympic National Park in Washington, the Hoh Rainforest or something there. Maybe some of you have been out that way. But it's getting harder and harder to find places in nature where there isn't the intrusion, particularly of engines, motors and engines from traffic or from overhead jet traffic. He talks about silence as an endangered species, and he talks about it that way because he believes it's essential to our quality of life. Time in silence, he says, it's the think tank of the soul. We need it. We need it at a deep level. And that really resonated with me. Reminded me of, that's a soul hunger for me, I think. I must have it. I was remembering years ago, I lived in New York City for just a year or so after college because I wanted to experience big city life. And I had a couple of friends living in Manhattan. And I adjusted pretty dramatically and amazingly to this really, really high level of noise. Coming from a small town in northern Ohio to midtown, Manhattan, you wake up every morning to the sound of the trash trucks. How many of you have lived in this environment? Really scraping, screeching noises of trash trucks coming down your street. There's constant traffic noise. There's constant sirens, alarms going off, car alarms, shop alarms. There's overhead jet traffic, of course, at all times. It's this incredible level of noise that you somehow adjust to and learn to kind of filter out, so you're like not focusing on a lot of it, but it's there. It's there, and it certainly impacts your inner silence. It's hard to maintain inner silence when there's no outer silence. But it was in that, sometime during that year, over that summer, I guess, I took a weekend away in upstate New York. I took the bus up to Finger Lake area, kind of. My Aunt Jane met me up there in a little town called Hornell. If any of you are from New York State, I know you guys do. And then we drove another 30, 40 minutes to where my grandfather had some property near Bath, New York, Hammondsport, that area. I went up there, and it got quieter and quieter and quieter as we got up that way. And this amazing quiet when we arrived was like a shock to the system. There were only the sounds of crickets and katydids when we arrived, as it was after dark. It was the nightly chorus choir going on, and then quiet, just the crickets and the katydids all night, and then in the morning, bird song, starting just a little bit, and then increasing more and more bird song as the light came out. And it took me about 24 hours. It was like my ears were ringing. It took me a little time for everything to clear and to relax into it. And I realized I was able to breathe in a way I had not for quite a while. Have you ever had that feeling where it's, that kind of breath? Can breathe again. That's the breath of the soul being nourished, I think, when you can breathe deeply that way. And I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath. I hadn't even realized I hadn't been breathing freely. It's something we don't track somehow. We make adjustments. It's part of what we do as human beings, and don't realize there's any loss to it. And don't realize how hungry we are for quiet, for silence. So I'm grateful for the work of Gordon Hempton and his mission to preserve quiet for the benefit of all life. I think it is something we need deeply in our lives, and I think many of us don't get alive in our day-to-day activities. Would you agree? Sometimes as I was watching our trash get picked up last week in Dublin, and I'm so grateful that there are people who do this for us. At the end of our driveway every week, they come and get, and our chipper service gets the leaves and the branches, whatever else we put out there. And I think about these young men who do that job and how noisy it is all day long. How noisy it is all day long. They start early and it's screeching noise and truck noises and traffic noises all day long. And then home, and I hope there's some quiet sometime at home in the evening. Is there time to be in the natural world and listen to crickets? Or hear the wind in the trees? I think there's a lot of soul hunger out there that we are barely aware of. And I think that can be behind a lot of frustration and dissatisfaction that can come out in cacophonous ways, troublesome ways. We need silence. We need it outside. We need it inside. We have trouble with meditation practice too, with creating silence in our environment, because I think we're out of practice with it. And it can feel a little uncomfortable if you haven't been experiencing quiet, if you haven't really been bringing silence into your life. I remember, and we struggle with it. We had a meditation class recently here at the church, where I was glad we did. Lisa Ferraro guided us in that, to try to become a little more comfortable with silence and experience that more often on a regular basis. I remember years ago at Unity Columbus on Mays Road, a little group of us tried to start a mindfulness meditation group once a week. I can't remember when it was, but and there were like 4 of us. We'd rotate, and one of us would lead the mindfulness meditation, which was just a little guiding in meditation, words to guide you into meditation, maybe providing of a focusing word or phrase, and then silence for at least half an hour we tried to aim for. And invariably, I don't think there was one week that it didn't happen. Invariably, somebody would come in a little late, and we would hear scrape, the buildings would come scrape, and then, the meditation starting, and we're all closing, and we're meditating, scraping of chairs, or somebody decided to come in and use the piano down in the chapel, or whatever it might be. We struggled so hard with it to, all right, we don't let that interfere with our practice. Those of you who are meditating know how you do this. You just kind of let it go by. You don't let your mind fix on it. But inside, you're also thinking like, good God, can't we have a few minutes of silence? I think we kept that up for a while, but it was hard. And there's no animosity about it. It's just kind of human life, isn't it? It's very hard to preserve a quiet place for even a few minutes. Gordon Hempton is tracking it. It's tough to do. It's tough to do. I had a similar experience. I went to a meditation retreat, kind of a personal meditation retreat. I found this little place online. I think it was up in Fremont, Ohio, or something like that. And it was a beautiful property. I think it was a Catholic-run place, and they had a couple of hermitage cabins that sounded so nice, just like a little cabin, all you'd need, intended for meditation, and spiritual practice for a hermitage. And I booked a weekend there, and it was lovely. And the first evening was really, really sweet, and I had a lovely meditation, I remember that evening. But early the next day, someone else arrived at the other hermitage cabin, which unfortunately was only about 20 feet away. Not a good idea to build two hermitage cabins right next to each other, would you agree? I didn't realize what a problem it would be, but the person who moved into the hermitage cabin next to me saw it as more of a social thing, and she had friends visit, and she was talking on her cell, which I could hear every conversation all weekend. So I spent that whole weekend deciding, am I going to go complain, or am I going to weave it into as part of my practice? And I went for the latter, but in retrospect I thought, I should have gone right back to that office and said, this isn't working. Silence is hard. Silence is gold, and it's precious, and it's hard to achieve, even when you're working on it. We need to have that time in silence. We need it internally, and we need it in our outer lives as well. They're very intricately related. I think it's very difficult to be able to maintain good inner silence and to feel like you have a still and calm center and build that through practice if there's no silence in your outer life. They're so intricately related. So here's the question on this idea to consider is, are you giving yourself an opportunity to experience quiet? Are there quiet places you go to regularly or periodically to refresh, to nourish yourself? So where are those places? Or where are those moments in your days? And then the practice is to kind of do some open listening, because a lot of this is we're not aware of it. Do some open listening, not the focused, the way we learn to filter out like I did in New York City, which we kind of learn to tune things out. And Gordon Hempton calls that really more of a controlled impairment. We're learning to not hear certain things. We're not improving our listening skills. We're learning to impair them, really. I'm not going to focus on any of that. I'm just going to focus on, my colleagues or my job or my car or whatever. I'm going to focus right here. Do some open listening, which is just really, as you move through your day, letting it all in without filters, and reflect on what's coming in. How much natural sound might be reaching you? Are you having opportunities where you're taking in the sound of crickets and katydids, where you're hearing some bird song, where you're hearing some wind in trees, or I sat out, we had a rain yesterday. Did you all have rain? Hallelujah, we had a rainfall. It was wonderful. I sat out on the screen porch and just listened to the symphony of rain. What a refreshment for the soul. Our souls need that kind of soaking up, but we need to kind of give ourselves, reflect on what's coming in, be aware of the opportunities we're giving ourselves or not giving ourselves, and maybe reflect on whether we need to give ourselves more such opportunities. Take a trip to a farm, go pick some apples someplace nice and quiet and peaceful, go to a lake, visit a forest. In Japan, they're doing something called forest bathing. Some of you might have heard about it. And in some of the bigger cities, you can get your doctor to give you a prescription to go forest bathing. Some of the parks, they're state or national parks, whatever they call them, you can go for a day or a retreat where you spend a lot of time. It's not hiking, it's just bathing yourself in the feeling of the forest and soaking that up. They get it. They are getting it. How deeply that nourishes. Just to be listening to the silence of the forest, which there's always a little sound in, of bugs or birds or wind, and to just let that work on you. We need that. We We need the silence of the natural world to feel healthy, to feel fulfilled. That partly goes into the idea of solitude as well. We need some times by ourselves. Joe and I were talking this morning, we saw a group of women walking this morning on the way to church. They're just along the road somewhere, and I thought, that's really nice that they're doing that. You know, it's kind of a fun group activity. But I was thinking of the years that I walked every morning and how that nourished me. It wouldn't have been the same if I talked the whole time. It just wouldn't have. That was my time out of a solitude time I walked up to the Park of Roses and back for almost 10 years. That was kind of my routine. And there were the back alleys and paths down by the Olentangy River. And it was that quiet time that I wouldn't have wanted to talk it away. I wanted to just experience that morning quiet and soak that up. Are there things like that in your life? Does this resonate with you? Is there in you a level where you are hungry for quiet, for silence? So let's have a little silence meditation for a moment right now as we kind of close this first installment of Soul Hunger, I guess. Let's close our eyes and just do a little open listening. Allow ourselves to become very centered, very still. Gently aware of the particular kind of quiet in this room. There's a sound of water. There's air circulating. There are fans. There's breathing. And it's gentle. We allow it to just flow into us without restriction. We just listen to the quiet sounds in this sacred space. And we let ourselves be nourished for a few minutes in the silence. Begin to come out of this moment of silence together. We bring with us an awareness of the accessibility of that deep quiet within and around us. That we can contact it at any time. We can rest in it. We can claim some inner silence and nourish ourselves. And we affirm our intention through the days of the week before us to build silence into our lives, into the moments of our days, to let it refresh us, to fill us up. Moments in our days of quiet, breathing. Moments of quiet between our activities. Moments of silence in meditation and in conversation. We let there be moments of silence, knowing that every moment of quiet nourishes us at a deep level, and we are fed, and we are grateful. And so it is. Amen.